Ethan stood at the edge of the shining metal gate of the academy, his heart beating fast as he looked up at the massive building in front of him. Shaped like a spiral rising into the sky, glowing with strange purple lights, he had dreamed of this moment since the day he was accepted into the Intergalactic Unity Academy, the only human chosen this year from Mathe, a planet many alien races still did not trust or understand. He took a breath and stepped inside the hall, feeling hundreds of eyes watching him from screens and corners, invisible voices whispering in alien tongues through the speakers, as if scanning his every movement and every callie. Every thought. The hallway stretched endlessly, and its walls shimmered like moving water, while his own reflection flickered in and out, showing different versions of himself, some older, some younger, some looking afraid, and some looking brave. He followed the glowing line on the floor, marked with his name written in both English and a language made of symbols that moved like tiny stars. The line stopped at a large door that slowly opened with a soft hum, revealing a classroom unlike anything he had seen before. Floating desks, shining walls, and glowing symbols dancing in the air. There were no boys inside, only girls, and they were not human. They had skin like crystal or fur, like starlight, or eyes that sparkled like galaxies, each one more strange and beautiful than the last. Teacher, a tall being with 6 arms and a face that kept shifting, turned toward Ethan and spoke in a soft but powerful voice, saying, "Welcome, student from Earth today. Your true lessons begin." Every head turned to look at him, some curious, some cold, some confused, and one girl in the back with deep, violet eyes that seemed to glow even in the light just stared without blinking. Ethan walked slowly to the only empty desk at the center of the room, feeling their eyes follow him every step, like invisible weights pressing on his shoulders, making him feel smaller and heavier with each second. He sat down, trying to smile, trying to act normal, but the silence in the room was loud and thick, like it could crush him if he moved the wrong way or said the wrong word. One alien girl leaned toward another and whispered something that made both of them laugh softly, covering their mouths with elegant fingers that had more than 5. The teacher spoke again, now in a language Ethan could barely understand, something about respect and unity, but he could feel the tension in the room, like electricity in the air before a storm. A small drone floated toward him, scanning his ID and projecting his full name in the air. Ethan Walker, Human Earth, age 17, status active. And then the drone beeped and flew away. Ethan tried to focus on the screen in front of him, but he could feel the weight of 100 thoughts pressing against him like waves trying to drown his mind. Suddenly, the girl with violet eyes stood up and asked the teacher in a calm voice, why was a human placed in their class when the rules clearly stated no human male had ever been accepted before? The teacher paused, looked at Ethan, and then said, times are changing, and perhaps change begins with a question, not an answer. The girl sat down again, but her eyes did not leave him, and Ethan felt like she was not just looking at him, but reading him like a book or testing him without words. When the class ended, Ethan walked out quickly, his hands shaking a little, and his mind full of questions. He had no answers to why did they look at him like that? Why did they act like he was a threat or maybe a mistake? And why did the girl with violet eyes speak as if she knew something he did not? As he walked back to his dorm, the hallways felt longer and colder, and the lights flickered like they were watching him, like the academy itself was waiting to see what he would do. Next, he opened the door to his room, sat on the bed, and stared at the ceiling, wondering if he had made a mistake by coming here, or if this was the beginning of something far bigger than he could understand. Then just as his eyes began to close, he saw a glowing symbol appear on his wall, a circle inside a triangle with a human hand reaching out to touch something not human. He did not know what it meant, but somehow he felt it was connected to everything, to the looks, the whispers, the girl with the glowing eyes, and the quiet storm that was only just beginning. Ethan woke early, his body still tired, but his mind alert, as the memory of yesterday played again and again inside his head. The way the alien girls had stared, the voice of the teacher, and that symbol on the wall that appeared just before he closed his eyes. He stood in front of the mirror in his dorm, trying to smooth his shirt, wondering if today would be better or worse. Maybe today someone would talk to him. Maybe someone would tell him what was really going on behind those silent eyes. The hallway outside his room was quiet and empty, his footsteps echoing softly as he walked toward the classroom. Each door he passed shimmered with light, as if the academy itself breathed around him. Watching, learning, thinking. When he entered the class, the air shifted. The room was already full of students, and again, all eyes turned toward him, some blinking slowly, some glowing softly, and the same silence wrapped around him like cold fog. Ethan walked to his desk, trying not to trip, not to look nervous, and not to meet the gaze of the violet-eyed girl who still stared at him like a puzzle she could not solve. Teacher arrived, floating in with soft, glowing steps, and without any welcome or question, she waved a hand, and the room transformed into a strange virtual space filled with floating shapes, glowing puzzles, and shifting symbols in mid-air. Today, the teacher said, "You will all compete in pairs, but the human boy will compete alone. Let us see what he is made of." Some of the girls smirked, some whispered again, and one even laughed a little too loudly before covering her mouth. But the teacher ignored them and signaled for the test to begin. Nathan blinked as a puzzle appeared before him, lines glowing like fire, dancing in patterns he could not understand, shapes moving in ways his brain struggled to follow, and numbers that kept changing without any rule. He took a breath and focused, remembering what he had read on Earth about alien math and how patterns often followed emotion rather than logic. And slowly he began to touch the shapes, letting instinct guide his hand. One by one, the puzzles opened like flowers, blooming under light, and the screen flashed green again and again as the timer above his head kept ticking. On the other side of the room, the other students worked in silence, their heads tilted, their hands flying over strange tools and controls, and some began to notice Ethan not failing, not freezing, but solving. Whispers grew louder, not words he could understand, but the tone was clear surprise, disbelief, even annoyance. And suddenly one girl stood up, pointing at his screen and saying something in a sharp voice that made the whole room fall silent. She walked toward him, her silver hair floating behind her, and challenged him to a duel of care speed, saying if he truly deserved to be here, then he should prove it now in front of them all. Ethan stood slowly, unsure if this was allowed, unsure if this was a trap, but the teacher nodded and raised a hand. The lights dimmed, and a new test appeared. Between them, a race of logic and reflex, with shapes that changed faster than thought. The countdown began, and Ethan's heart pounded in his ears. 1-3 to begin. His fingers moved without thinking, tracing shapes, finding patterns, solving sequences, dodging traps that tried to reset his board. And when the last light turned green, his screen blinked before hers. A pause filled the room, a silence deeper than before, and then the teacher clapped once, her hands glowing slightly as she said the result. "It's clear." The girl frowned and walked away, her face unreadable, but her eyes now different, not angry, not mocking, but curious, as if she had seen something new, something unexpected. Ethan sat down again, breathing hard, his hands shaking, but his mind calm. He had one, and even though the room was still full of tension, something had shifted after class, as the students left in small groups, whispering to each other. Zira, the violet-eyed girl, walked past him, slowly stopping only for a second, and whispering, "You learn fast, but you are still not safe." Ethan looked up, wanting to ask what she meant, but she was already gone, her steps light like shadows, fading in the light back. In his dorm, he stared again at the symbol on the wall, now glowing brighter than before, and as he touched it, the light spread across the room, showing shapes and stars, and something that looked like a human standing beside something ancient and powerful. He did not know what he had stepped into, but he knew now. That the academy was not just a school, and these girls were not just students, and he was not here by accident. He was being tested not just in class, but in every word, every silence, every stare, and he could feel it deep inside his chest like a voice, without sound, whispering to keep going, to not turn back, because something was watching, waiting, and whatever it was, it did not want him to fail. Ethan sat on the floor of his dorm, staring at the strange symbol, now fully glowing on the wall, its light pulsing gently, as if breathing with him, as if it knew he was afraid, and still it remained silent, offering no answers, no voice, no message. Only light. He leaned back slowly, his mind spinning with questions that kept returning like echoes. Why was he here? What did they want from him? Why were those girls so quiet, so powerful, so strange? And what was it Zira meant when she said he was not safe? Sleep came to him like a fog pulling him under, but it was not peaceful for the first time. He dreamed not of Earth, not of his home, but of stars spinning fast, of voices calling his name in languages he did not understand, of eyes glowing in the dark, and of that same symbol floating above everything, as if watching, as if waiting. When morning came, he felt different, not rested, but sharper, like a string pulled too tight. His senses alert to every sound, every movement, every flicker of light around him. In class, the teacher did not speak. She only waved her hand, and the walls dissolved into a star map, each point of light a different planet, each glowing line a path of knowledge, a web of truth and history that connected the galaxy. Ethan tried to follow the lines, but something pulled his eyes toward a dark corner of the map, a section marked only with a warning in bold letters, in a language that buzzed in his skull and made his head hurt. He looked away, only to find Zira staring at him again, her head tilted slightly, her fingers tapping the table in a slow rhythm like a countdown. When the lesson ended, she stood without a word and walked out, but she paused at the door, turned her head just enough for him to see her profile, and then continued walking slowly, as if waiting for him to follow. Ethan hesitated for only a second, then rose and slipped out behind her. The hallway was empty, the lights dimmer than usual, and her steps were silent but sure, like she knew exactly where she was going. They walked through twisting corridors, past doors with no names, past windows that showed stars spinning, past shapes in the shadows that moved just out of sight, until they reached a door made of black stone, pulsing faintly like it had a heartbeat. Sierra placed her hand on the surface, and the door opened without sound, revealing a small room filled with floating crystals and glowing books, and one large screen showing an image of a human boy, not Ethan, but someone older, with eyes full of pain and courage, and behind him the same symbol now burned into Ethan's memory. She turned to him and said this was the last human who studied here, and he was my brother. Ethan froze, the air in the room suddenly colder, his mind trying to understand, but Zira continued speaking, her voice steady but filled with something heavy, something ancient. He came here thinking he was just a student like you, but they had plans for him, plans he never knew about until it was too late. They tested him, pushed him, watched him like they are watching you now, and when he refused to join their secret program, they erased him from history. But I remember. And so does this room. Ethan looked at the screen again, at the boy who looked like he was fighting against something too big to see, and he felt a cold wave wash over him, not of fear, but of connection, as if the past was reaching through time to warn him, to guide him. Zira stepped closer and touched his shoulder, saying, "You are not safe here, because you are more than a student. You are a variable. They cannot control a piece that does not fit their plan, and that makes you dangerous." He asked her why she was helping him, and she smiled sadly, saying, "Because you remind me of him, and because, if you fall like he did then, all of this repeats again and again, and I am tired of watching good people disappear into silence." Before Ethan could speak, the room shook lightly, a soft alarm blinking red across the wall, and Zira's eyes narrowed. "We have "To leave," she said. "They know you are here, and if they find us, they will erase this room like they erased him." They ran through the hallways, now darker, now full of whispers, like the walls themselves were alive and angry, chasing them with cold voices and invisible hands. And when they finally reached the main corridor, the lights snapped back to normal, as if nothing had happened. Ethan returned to his desk, heart pounding, eyes wide, and mind burning with what he had just seen, while the teacher entered as usual, as calm as ever, speaking of logic and unity as if nothing outside the lesson had meaning. But Ethan knew better now. He knew the academy was not what it seemed, and that his presence here was not random, and that behind every eye watching him was not curiosity, but history, fear, and control. He looked at Zira across the room, and she nodded once, slow and firm, as if saying, "This is only the beginning, and you are not alone anymore." And for the first time since arriving, Ethan did not feel afraid. He felt awake, sat at his desk, eyes locked forward, pretending to listen to the teacher, but his thoughts were far away, spinning like the stars outside the academy windows, filled with the image of the lost human boy, Zira's brother, and the cold truth she had shared in the hidden room where memories still floated like ghosts refusing to die. Teacher spoke of interspecies cooperation and the future of the galaxy, but her voice felt hollow, like a cover hiding something deeper, something darker. And Ethan knew now that every word was part of a larger plan, a quiet system built to observe, test, and decide who stays, who rises, and who vanishes. Shira had not spoken to him since that moment, but her glance, her silence, her calm were louder than words, a silent promise that she would not let him face this alone, but she would not always be able to stand beside him. Either not here, not in the open where eyes watched from everywhere. Suddenly the classroom lights dimmed, and the walls turned dark blue as a screen unfolded from above, casting a strange symbol in the center, a shape like a cube, but shifting constantly, impossible to lock into one form, as if it was alive and thinking. Today, the teacher announced, "We will hold a practical challenge, one not based on theory, but reaction, decision, and instinct. Your environment will test you, your survival will score you, and all outcomes are recorded and reviewed by the UHI." Those students looked at each other, but no one spoke, no one questioned, and Ethan saw a flicker of tension, even in the most confident faces, a tightness in the jaw, a glance at the floor, a quiet fear that whatever this test was, it would not be fair, and it would not be kind. He was assigned no partner, again placed in the center of the simulation chamber, where the floor felt like glass and the ceiling disappeared into blackness. And then, with no warning, the world changed around him. He stood now in a metallic maze, walls glowing faintly. Under his feet, a trail of symbols that blinked every few steps, and behind him a sound like breathing, not his own, not human, and not friendly. Ethan moved quickly, heart racing every turn of the maze, showing new dangers, one path filled with traps that triggered when he hesitated, another filled with questions, an alien script that twisted his mind when he stared too long, and one corridor that simply ended in nothingness, a void that with hunger. He tried to stay calm, tried to remember what he had learned, what Zero had told him, that emotion controls power in this academy, more than logic, more than numbers. And so he focused on his breath, on the beat of his heart, and tried to walk not with fear, but with purpose. One wall shifted suddenly, and a creature appeared, part machine, part smoke, with glowing red eyes that blinked in patterns, and it spoke a challenge: solve or dissolve, no other way out. Ethan stepped forward and saw a puzzle written in light. It looked like a map, but with no labels, only movement lines swirling toward a center point, and he understood it was a memory test of the maze itself. He closed his eyes for a second, recalled every turn, every symbol, every flicker he had passed, and traced his fingers over the light, following the path backward, not forward, and the creature paused, shimmered, and vanished into air, leaving a passage behind it. As he moved deeper, he began to hear Sounds, not physical sounds, but memories, laughter, whispers, shouting, and one voice calling his name in a tone he remembered from Earth. From his mother, a voice that could not be real but echoed in the maze like it was trapped, waiting. He almost turned back, almost lost focus, but then a new sound pulled him forward, a voice. Not from Earth, not human, but soft and clear, saying you are being watched, you are being judged, and your reaction shapes your fate. Reached a large chamber at the center, where all paths seemed to meet, and in the middle stood a table with one single object, a small sphere, glowing with a light that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He touched it, and the maze fell apart, the walls breaking into stars and the sky above opening into a view of the galaxy spinning slowly like a clock. And he was standing again in the classroom at his desk, while the other students watched in silence. The teacher nodded once and said, "Test complete." Ethan Walker recorded response, noted path chosen, result pending review. One spoke, but something had changed. The way they looked at him now was not just curiosity or fear, but something else, respect maybe, or something close to it. And even the girl who had once challenged him avoided his eyes as if unsure what she had just seen. Sierra sat with her hands folded, her face calm, but her eyes bright, and when their gaze met, she blinked once, slow and firm, and that was all the signal he needed to know. He had passed something, not just the test, but a barrier that had been placed between him and them since the day he arrived. And though the academy still felt like a cage, its bars now glowed weaker than before, and somewhere deep within its core, something had shifted, because one human boy had walked through the storm and emerged still standing. The academy sky changed color without warning. Soft blues turned to golden light, and then into a burning shade of red. Not fire, not danger, but something grand, something ancient that made even the teachers pause and the students whisper in languages Ethan could not understand. He was sitting in the quiet zone near the edge of the academy grounds, watching the clouds shift when the sound came, not a siren, not an alarm, but a low, deep hum that made the ground vibrate and the trees bend slightly like they were bowing. Zira appeared beside him without sound, her face calm, her voice soft, as she said that Queen is coming. And no one knows why she never visits this part of the galaxy without reason, and certainly not without warning. Ethan stood slowly, feeling the weight of something heavy in the air, something unseen but present, like invisible hands pressing against his chest. And when he looked up, he saw it, a ship larger than anything he had imagined descending from the sky, its shape like a perfect crystal, its surface glowing with living patterns that moved like thoughts. Students gathered silently on the field. The teachers formed a line. The principal bowed low, and Ethan saw the fear in their posture, not terror, but respect, a kind that went beyond rules and reached into the ship landed without sound. The doors opened like petals unfolding, and from the heart of that ship stepped a woman taller than anyone Ethan had ever seen. Her skin shimmered like stars, her hair floated like silver mist, and her eyes were like twin moons, glowing softly but watching everything. She wore a robe made of light, not cloth, and when she walked, it seemed the ground beneath her shimmered into gold for a moment and back again, as if the world itself adjusted for her presence. Sierra whispered her name in a voice barely above breath. Queen Loreth, ruler of the Galactic Council, speaker of the core hearts and judge of the living trials. And Ethan realized that every legend he had read back on Earth had not even come close to what stood before him now. The Queen stopped in front of the assembled group, her eyes scanning, slowly passing over each face until they landed on Ethan, and stayed there, unmoving, steady, and impossible to ignore. "This is the human," she said, "not a question but a confirmation, like she already knew everything, like she had watched him from the beginning and only now decided to step into the light." It felt his breath catch, but he held her gaze, trying not to look away, trying to be what she expected, or maybe trying to be what she feared he might become. She smiled, not with joy but with interest, and said, "Bring him forward." And the teachers Hesitated only for a second before motioning for him to step ahead. He walked slowly across the field, the students silent, the air so still that every step echoed like thunder. And when he stood before her, she reached out one glowing hand and touched his forehead gently. Images exploded in his mind. Not memories, not dreams, but visions, galaxies. Being born, stars, falling, battles fought in silence, and one image of a boy who looked like him standing beside her with a blade of light in his hand and tears in his eyes. She removed her hand and said, "You carry echoes not just from your world, but from the past and perhaps the future, and it is time you learned the truth of why you were brought." Herezira stepped forward, her voice firm and clear, saying, "He deserves to know, and you promised we would never repeat what happened last time, and—" The queen looked at her for a long time before nodding once Ethan was told to follow them into the ship, and as he walked inside, he saw walls made of memory pictures and moments floating in the air showing the history of the academy and the hidden truths of those who came before him. A quiet chamber at the heart of the ship. The queen spoke, not like a ruler, but like a teacher, saying long ago, "Your kind was feared not for your strength, but for your unpredictability, your will, your chaos, and one human changed everything by offering peace and sacrifice, and we lost him before we could understand his true purpose. You are not here by chance," she said. "You are here because something in you calls to the same power he once held, and we are not sure if it will save us or destroy what we built, and so you are being watched, not to be controlled, but to be understood." Mithon listened, not sure what to feel, not sure if he was proud or scared or both, but he nodded slowly, knowing that, whatever this path was, it had already begun, and there was no going back. When he stepped off the ship, hours later, the students looked at him differently, not as an outsider, not as an enemy, but as something else, maybe not friend, not yet, but something that made them wonder what came next. And far above the academy, the stars shifted slightly, as if preparing for something that had waited too long to begin. Ethan stood under the stars, his mind spinning with everything the queen had said, her words echoing like ancient songs in a quiet cave, and every sentence carried weight not just in sound, but in meaning, as if the truth she spoke had the power to shape the future itself. He returned to his dorm, but found no rest, his eyes wide open, his body still and silent, while his thoughts flew faster than light, chasing answers that kept running just out of reach. And every time he closed his eyes, he saw her face, calm, wise, and watching, always watching. When morning came, he did not wait for the class bell. Instead, he walked through the halls, guided by memory and something else, something deeper than logic, something like instinct or fate, pulling him toward the west wing, where few students ever went, and where the lights flickered, as if unsure of his presence. Zira waited near a sealed door, her hands behind her back, her eyes unreadable but not cold, and when she saw him, she only said, "Come. I have something you must see." And he followed without question, without fear, because now he knew that fear was a tool used by those who hide the truth. The door opened with a slow whisper, revealing a chamber unlike the last one. This one was older, darker, filled with floating data crystals and long-forgotten artifacts placed carefully on metal shelves. Covered in soft blue light, Sierra stepped inside and touched a wall. The surface shifted to reveal a screen showing a file marked Project Echo Phase 1, and she turned to him, saying, "This is where it began, not with you, not with me, but with him, my brother, the first human to join this academy." Watch the screen as images unfolded, showing a boy like him, maybe older, maybe wiser, standing before the same teachers, walking the same halls, and facing the same tests, only his trials were harder, crueler, designed not to teach, but to break and study and judge. He saw footage of experiments of isolation, of psychological simulations that ran for days, and when the boy resisted, they increased the pressure until one day he vanished, not by accident, not by mistake, but by design, and the records simply marked him as withdrawn. Zyra spoke softly, her voice steady but filled with sorrow. They feared him. Because he refused control, because he asked questions, because he saw through their games, and because he discovered something they wanted to keep buried, and when he tried to share it, they silenced him. Ethan turned to her asking, "What did he find?" And she pointed to a crystal resting in a glass case. Its shape simple, its color dull, but inside, it glowed faintly with a pulse that matched his own heartbeat. And she said, "This is not from any known world. This is older than our maps, older than our history, and my brother believed it came from the lost time before the council, before the rules, before the system." She placed the crystal in his hand, and it felt warm, not hot, not cold, but alive, as if something inside it remembered him, or maybe remembered someone like him, and as he held it, images flashed in his mind of a great war, of a broken galaxy, and of a voice saying balance can only come from those who live between the stars. Looked at Zira and said, "Why show me this now?" And she answered, "Because they are watching again. And they will test you again, and this time they will not wait for failure. They will create it if they must, and you need to know who you are before they tell you who to be." Left the room in silence, but Ethan was not the same. He walked with purpose, with knowledge, and with something else, a quiet fire, growing inside a light that came not from the stars, but from within, something no test could measure and no teacher could grade. Later that day, in class, the teacher announced a new phase of study, one involving group simulations on unknown planets. And Ethan knew this was it. The next step, the next trap, or maybe the next chance, depending on how he played the Gamma Zira. Met his eyes once and nodded, and he understood her message clearly. Stay ready, stay sharp, and above all, stay true to what you know, because soon the Academy will stop pretending, and the real purpose of your presence will begin to reveal itself. Night. Ethan stood by the window of his dorm, holding the crystal, watching the stars as they blinked slowly, like old eyes opening for the first time, and he whispered to the dark, "I will not vanish, I will not break, I will find the truth, and I will make them see, and will make them see, and will make them see, and will make seen, and will see." Make sees us as a luxurious. He sees us, makes his law. Wills us, sees us, will sees us. Will make wills, taste k, will sees us, live sees, make sees. Well sees us, lives, wills, makes. We see us, well acquis, k so wise it siv. We eps, we will allies it, by with it go, with see uns lay it, karatikayu se I sit we secreta me sasa lats to sick get it today they psychicos to get this to with us to peak this to the it's to the there is still the somewhere far above, beyond what any sensor could reach, a second pulse answered his call, soft, faint, but real as if something or someone had heard his words and was waiting for the moment to rise again. Ethan woke before the Academy lights turned on, his eyes already open, his mind already focused, and his heart steady. Like the calm before a storm that has waited too long to break, he sat on the edge of his bed, holding the crystal in his hand. Its soft pulse, now stronger, brighter, and warmer than ever before, as if it knew something important was coming outside. The halls were silent, the air heavy with a strange pressure, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for a moment that could not be undone. And as Ethan stepped into the main corridor, he noticed something new. Every screen, every symbol, every light bore the same ancient mark, the triangle and the circle glowing above. A human figure, now displayed for all to see, walked slowly toward the central hall where all students and teachers had been summoned, where the Queen had returned, where the council members from distant worlds floated in their crystal thrones, watching from behind invisible shields, their eyes unreadable, their presence undeniable. And in the middle of that massive chamber stood a single platform surrounded by light, and silent. Shazira stood nearby, her posture firm, her expression calm, but her eyes full of fire and truth. And when Ethan reached She whispered only one word, remember, and he nodded without speaking, because he remembered everything, every challenge, every stare, every whisper, every test, and most of all, he remembered who he was before this place tried to reshape him. The queen raised her hand, and the room fell into perfect stillness, and then she said, "Today, we decide the fate of a question that has waited too long for an answer. Today, we watch one who has walked the path of fire and shadow and light, and see if he still stands today. We test not his strength, but his truth." A glowing door appeared behind Ethan, and without waiting, he stepped through it, knowing this was the final trial, not of skill or speed, but of self, and as the light faded, found himself standing in a vast, empty field under a sky that looked both familiar and strange. Stars above him, grass below him, wind that whispered like voices from forgotten dreams. Before him appeared a reflection of himself, but not a mirror, not a copy, something deeper. Something older, with eyes that carried pain and hope and fear and courage all at once, and the reflection spoke in a voice that sounded like his own, but fuller, and said, "Who are you really, without titles, without tests, without fear, without lies? Who are you when no one is watching?" And took a breath and answered, "I am not chosen, I am not perfect, I am not part of a plan. I am just a boy who refused to give up, who saw truth and followed it, even when it hurt, even when it cost me everything. I am not what they want me to be, but I am what I choose to be." Reflection smiled and said, "Then you are ready." And the field vanished, and the chamber returned, and Ethan stood alone in the center as the queen rose and the council leaned forward, and the students watched with eyes wide and waiting. The queen spoke again, her voice clear and sharp, like light through glass, and said, "You were brought here as an experiment, as a variable, as a test of theory. But now you stand here not as a subject, but as a symbol. You have faced our fears and returned with truth. You have passed through the unseen fire and remained whole, and now you must choose. Do you walk away free and silent, or do you stay and lead and change what should have changed long?" Agoithan looked around at the faces, some hopeful, some scared, some unsure, and then he looked at Zira, who simply watched without pushing, and he said, "I will not run, I will stay, and I will speak, and I will lead, not with force, not with fear, but with truth, because someone has to start the change, and it might as well be me." The chamber filled with light. The council vanished. The queen bowed her head. The students erupted into voices, whispers, cheers, questions, and Ethan stood still, calm, ready not for peace, not for power, but for purpose, and for the first time since arriving, he felt no weight on his shoulders, only light in his chest. Later that night, alone in the quiet of the observation deck, Ethan stood beside Zira, watching the stars as they moved slowly across the sky, and she said softly, "Everything is different now." And he nodded, saying, "Yes, and now it begins." Far above the academy, a new symbol appeared in the sky, not written by hands, not carved by machines, but formed by the stars themselves. And all across the galaxy, people paused and looked up and felt something shift, something ancient, something new, something human.